Hey everyone, it's Chrono from the Headphone Show. Today with me I have the Audio-Technica ADX5000. Let's check it out. Alright, so Audio-Technica is of course a company that's been a prominent player in the high-end audio market, and their offerings range anywhere from lifestyle headsets and earbuds to more professional and audiophile-oriented headphones. And the headphone we'll be taking a look at today fits in the latter category. So no, we're not going to be talking about the ATH-M50X, but the much more premium, higher end, and definitely not as commonly talked about ADX5000, which retails for about $2,000. So without further ado, let's get started. First, checking out accessories. Despite being packaged in a gigantic box, there isn't really much accompanying the ADX5000. It's a bit too large to be labeled as portable, but you get a really nice brown travel case that is sure to keep your precious headphones safe on the go. And as far as included cables go, it's Audio-Technica's proprietary A2DC audio design coaxial cable, which measures roughly 3 meters in length and has a single-ended 1/4 inch termination. Given the price tag, of course it would have been nice to have seen an additional cable that's maybe shorter, or a balanced option, or even some adapters, but my main complaint is actually that the included cable, whilst it is flexible and it's very thin, it is very microphonic. So if you're just sitting down like for desk use, it probably won't be as much of an issue, but even the slightest movement, you'll hear it rub against your clothes. And if you're really sensitive to that, it's something to keep in mind, because again, this is using proprietary connectors and it won't be as easy finding a replacement cable. Moving on to build and comfort, I'll say that with its industrial, professional design, the ADX5000 is not the flashiest or particularly eye-catching flagship out there. However, I sincerely appreciate the design choices made for this headphone because it makes for a practical build that is sturdy and unbelievably comfortable. The use of magnesium for the headphone's frame makes for a chassis that is extremely lightweight at 270 grams. Additionally, the use of Alcantara makes for pads that are soft on the skin and resistant to heat buildup. For users with large ears, the inner diameter of the pads might be a little bit on the smaller side and may cause contact, but overall, I think that this is one of the most, if not the most comfortable headphone I've personally had the opportunity to wear. But moving along to sound now, the ADX5000 is intended to be a reference listening high-end personal audio headphone that creates a faithful image of your music. And to this end, the ADX5000 combines its 58mm dynamic driver, tungsten diaphragm, baffle, and magnetic circuit into a single unit that is set on Audio-Technica's core mount technology to optimize airflow and reduce unwanted vibrations. Okay, so let's get this out of the way. This is a bright headphone, but before you start running to your HC650s, let me just say that this is a prime example of a headphone that's bright but done right. As I first listened to it, it was clear to me that the focus of the ADX5000 was shifted towards the upper registers. Compared to my EQ'd HD560S, which I use as reference, the treble range did feel as though it had seen a slight upshelf, but it wasn't exaggerated, and I found it to play nicely in the context of the frequency response as a whole. For me, however, there were what I would describe as some timbral artifacts that originated from the accentuated highs, and we'll be discussing those briefly. Starting with the bass, despite being a headphone that leans towards the brighter side, it actually still has a bass response that is present, and one that also adds quite a bit of warmth to the mix by virtue of a mid-bass bump that it has at around 125 Hz. There were a few things though that I did notice when listening to the lower tones on the ADX5000, and the first one was that it does have a bit of roll off under 50 Hz. It's not as noticeable as on, for example, the HC100S, but you were definitely not getting as much of that sub-bass depth and rumble as on other similarly priced headphones. Additionally, I didn't get the feeling that the bass on the ADX5000 was particularly tight. That's not to say that it was not clean, but it certainly didn't have the same kind of precision and nimbleness in this region of the frequency response that its planar competitors or even the Focal Clear do. Again, similar to the HC100S in this regard, but it does perform a bit better. Now for the mids, the mid-range doesn't really stand out that much on the ADX5000 because of the elevated highs. However, when focusing on the mid-range alone and EQing down the highs a little bit, I would say that it has a pretty good mid-range tuning for the most part. It's linear throughout, and there wasn't really anything that I noticed that would compromise the headphone's ability to reproduce vocal and instrument tones in an organic way. The only thing I will comment on is that for my personal taste and preferences, I thought that 4K was a tiny bit forward. So if you're sensitive to that upper mid-range region like myself, then it might come across as just a tiny bit harsh. But aside from that, I thought it was a pretty decent mid-range tuning. Okay, so moving on to the highs, this is definitely where the ADX5000 is most interesting. As I mentioned earlier, it does have its focus shifted towards the upper registers. However, the reason why I think that it works in this case and isn't piercing or harsh like on headphones such as the DT1990 Pro is that the increase in the treble is both gradual and even, without any egregious peaks that introduce uncomfortable qualities into the listening experience. Still, there were 3 deviations that I did notice. The first two were at 6 and 10K, which introduced low and mid-treble sibilants respectively. These two elevations had the tendency to add a slightly exaggerated bite to percussive instruments in particular, and also overbrighten vocal and instrument harmonics. Then there was a peak at around 13K, which introduced a fairly unnatural brilliance to that air region above 10K, and it could sometimes make musical passages sound a little bit gleamy. Again, these rises in the treble weren't really fatiguing, but I did think that they had a slightly negative impact on the ADX5000's timbre. Now discussing technical performance and starting off with resolution. For detail retrieval and image clarity, the ADX5000 undoubtedly delivers the excellent performance that is expected from a flagship headphone, and it definitely squarely competes with the other headphones that are in that $1,000 to $2,000 price range. So throughout the entire frequency response, it creates a stable and clean image of the music that is adept at nuancing and texturing all the vocal and instrument tones. Then for soundstage imaging and layering, again, it delivers excellent performance, being slightly outpaced only by the HC100S and Hi-Fi Man Aria. For soundstage width, I would say that it provides a spacious presentation that presents a good sense of distance and scale without sounding artificial. Then for imaging, it's very precise and has no issues delineating the positioning and directionality of all elements in the mix. Then as for instrument separation and layering, I think it delivers some of the best in its price range with a great sense of depth and spacing between the various tracks that make up the passages. It allows you to easily peer into the music. Lastly, we have dynamics, and I think that in this regard, the ADX5000 delivers very good performance. In my personal opinion, I think it outperforms most of its competitors in this price bracket, with the exception being the Focal Clear, which is of course extremely punchy. But nonetheless, the ADX5000 delivers a satisfying sense of punch and slam. It has a harder kick and impact in the lows than the HC100S, LCDX, or Aria are able to provide, and its upper registers have a tactile snappiness and bite to them that makes for a very engaging and energetic listening experience. As always, I want to mention EQ briefly before heading into the conclusion of this video, and I think that the ADX5000 has a very good tonal balance out of the box that doesn't really need much tweaking. However, I personally prefer headphones with a tonality that I would describe as being warm neutral, so for the EQ I made for the ADX5000, I just seek to bring the headphones tonality closer to my personal preference by warming up the treble. So if you'd like to try out my EQ settings for the ADX5000, or all the other headphones I reviewed, there's going to be a link in the description down below to a post I've made on the headphones community forums. That is a compilation or list of all my EQ presets. Alright, so now to wrap up this review on the ADX5000, I have to say that it actually impressed me a lot in my time spent with it. In large part, I think that this is because I didn't really have high expectations for it, or any expectations at all. After all, my last experience with an Audio-Technica headphone, and this was many years ago now, was with the ATH50X, which I didn't really take a liking to. But again, I'll reiterate that this is a headphone that's really impressed me with its performance, and even though it's a bit brighter than what is normally my preference, I found it to deliver a very enjoyable listening experience. And I think that this is a dynamic driver headphone that is able to keep up with now legendary dynamic driver headphones like the HD800S and the Focal Clear. I recognize that the treble-focused frequency response isn't for everyone, but if you don't mind the added brilliance, then the ADX5000 is a headphone that I believe you will find very enjoyable. In some ways, I feel like it offers a balanced experience that sits between the Clear and the HD800S because it doesn't have the soundstage shortcomings of the former, but it has the much better dynamics than the latter. So overall, the ADX5000 is a headphone that will get a strong recommendation from me, and I hope that it's one you'll keep on your radar if you're on the lookout for a top-tier dynamic driver headphone. Anyways, that is all for me today. I hope you enjoyed this video or found it useful. If you did, do consider dropping a like. If you'd like to learn more about the ADX5000 or many other headphones, I highly encourage you to check out the review section available on headphones.com. For more headphone and audio content, stay tuned by subscribing to the Headphone Show here on YouTube. And until next time, this is Chrono signing off.